I challenge you to name one metal band from the last 50 years that doesn't owe a significant part of its sound, its style, or its very soul to these four guys from Birmingham. Metallica? Slayer? Ghost? Of course. But the list goes on. The entire family tree of heavy metal, every branch and every leaf, can be traced back to the single solitary seed planted by Black Sabbath. But here's the truly mind-bending part. They didn't set out to create a new genre. They didn't have a grand manifesto. They were just a blues rock band called Earth, trying to get a gig. So how did a band playing covers in European clubs accidentally invent an entire style of music? How did a horrifying factory accident, a crippling injury, and a shared love of scary movies combine to create the blueprint for every single metal band that would ever exist? This is the insane, improbable, and legendary story of the band that didn't just join a genre, they built it from the ground up. Section 1. The World Before Sabbath. To really grasp how revolutionary Sabbath was, you have to picture the world they emerged from. It's the late 1960s. The cultural soundtrack is dominated by peace and love. The biggest bands on Earth, emerging from the psychedelic haze of the summer of love, are singing about flower power, good vibrations, and strawberry fields. It's the era of Woodstock, of optimism, of a generation trying to float away from the world's problems on a cloud of folk rock and psychedelia. But in their hometown of Aston, a borough of Birmingham, England, there were no flowers. There was steel, smog, noise, and the monolithic factories that loomed over their lives. The guys in Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, grew up in a post-war working-class landscape. Their reality wasn't a sun-drenched music festival. It was rows of bomb-damaged houses, the constant threat of industrial accidents, and the grim prospect of spending your entire life on a factory floor. The cheerful, escapist music on the radio felt like a bad joke. It meant nothing to them because it had nothing to do with their lives. They started out, like many bands, playing the blues, but it wasn't quite working. It didn't capture the dread and the weight of their world. Then, one day across the street from their rehearsal space, they saw a cinema packed with people paying good money to see a horror movie. And a light bulb went off. Geezer Butler said to Ozzy, "Isn't it strange that people pay money to be frightened?" This one observation led to a billion-dollar idea. What if we stopped trying to write happy music, or even sad blues music, and started making scary music? This single decision would change the course of rock music forever. Section 2. The Unlikely Architects and the Happy Accident. This is where the story gets completely insane, where fate intervenes in the most brutal and transformative way possible. The entire sound of heavy metal wasn't cooked up in a studio or a practice room. It was forged in a sheet metal factory. On his very last day of work, before leaving to tour with a band, their 17-year-old guitarist, Tony Iommi, suffered a horrific accident. His mother had insisted he go in and finish the job properly. A giant industrial press slammed down, slicing off the tips of the middle and ring fingers on his fretting hand. For a guitarist, this was a death sentence. Doctors were blunt. You will never play guitar again. Iommi fell into a deep depression, his only dream seemingly destroyed. But then, his former factory manager visited him and brought him a record by the legendary jazz guitarist Django Reinhardt. He told Tony that Reinhardt, one of the greatest guitarists of all time, only played with 2 fingers after his own hand was horribly burned in a fire. It was a revelation. It was inspiration. Tony refused to give up. This happy accident born from tragedy, is literally what created the sound of heavy metal. To play again, he had to invent a whole new way to do it. He melted a plastic washing-up liquid bottle, then used a hot soldering iron to shape it into little prosthetic fingertips. But even with these thimbles, he couldn't feel the strings, and the tension was still agonizing. So he started experimenting. He used lighter, banjo-like strings, but the breakthrough came when he tuned his guitar way, way down. 3 semitones, to be exact. This simple change had an unbelievable side effect. It made the strings looser and easier to press, but it also created a sound that was darker, deeper, and heavier than anything anyone had ever heard before. Bassist Geezer Butler tuned down to match him, and in that moment, that massive, earth-shaking rumble became the absolute foundation of heavy metal. An accident created an entire genre. Section 3. The Sound of Doom. On February 13, 1970, a Friday the 13th, of course, they unleashed their first album, and the world was simply not ready. The opening track, Black Sabbath, is a masterclass in atmosphere. It begins with the sound of pouring rain, distant thunder, and a single, ominous church bell. Then, this riff hits. It's just 3 notes, but these 3 notes changed everything. It's an interval known as a tritone, a combination of notes so dissonant and unsettling that it was historically nicknamed Diabolus in Musica, the devil in music. There's a long-standing myth that this interval was banned by the Church in the Middle Ages because it sounded so inherently evil. While that's an exaggeration, it was considered so unpleasant that it was avoided for centuries in spiritual music. And here were Black Sabbath, building an entire rock song around it, weaponizing that feeling of pure dread. The lyrics, penned by Ozzy, were directly inspired by a terrifying vision Geezer Butler had experienced. Butler, who was dabbling in the occult, woke up to see a dark, spectral figure standing at the foot of his bed, which then vanished. He told Ozzy the story, and the words, "What is this that stands before me? Figure in black which points at me," were born. Add Ozzy Osbourne's haunting, wailing vocal delivery on top, and the effect was electrifying. This wasn't blues rock, this was horror. This was the invention of doom metal. Section 4. Forging the Blueprint. In just 2 astonishing years, from 1970 to 1971, Black Sabbath released 3 albums that became the Bible of heavy metal: Black Sabbath, Paranoid, and Master of Reality. This wasn't just a band having a hot streak, it was a band single-handedly writing a new musical language in real time. Other bands of the era, like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, had heavy songs. But for Sabbath, being dark and heavy was their entire identity. They didn't sing about girls, cars, or fantasy quests. They sang about the grim realities they knew: war, paranoia, drugs, and madness. Songs like War Pigs and Children of the Grave weren't just anti-war anthems, they were apocalyptic visions channeling the public's fear of the ongoing Vietnam War and the Cold War nuclear threat. Musically, they created the formula. Sabbath's songs were built around the riff. The massive, unforgettable guitar riff was the central character of every song. Then came Master of Reality. For this album, they tuned their guitars down even lower, from E to C sharp. This wasn't just for Iommi's fingers anymore. This was a conscious choice to make the sound bigger, heavier. The result was an album so crushingly heavy, so thick with a sludgy, fuzzy tone, that it would go on to directly inspire new subgenres decades later, from stoner rock to sludge metal. They proved that slow could be infinitely heavier than fast. Section 5. The Eternal Legacy. It is genuinely impossible to overstate the amount of influence this one band has had. Pick a metal subgenre, any subgenre, and you can trace its DNA directly back to a specific Black Sabbath album or even a single song. The slow, lumbering, down-tuned riffs of songs like Black Sabbath and Into the Void, that is the undisputed blueprint for doom metal. That groovy, fuzzy, thick sound they perfected on Master of Reality, that became the absolute template for stoner rock. The thrash metal titans of the 80s, Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, all point to Sabbath as one of their primary and most crucial influences. Lars Ulrich from Metallica famously said, "Bill, Geezer, Ozzy, and Tony, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't be here. If there was no Black Sabbath, hard rock and heavy metal as we know it today would look, sound, and be shaped very, very differently." But even outside of metal, their impact is staggering. The sound of 90s grunge, particularly bands like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, is drenched in Sabbath's sludgy, drop-tuned DNA. Dave Grohl, of both Nirvana and the Foo Fighters, has said that almost every band that made it big in the 90s owed a debt to them. Even artists you wouldn't expect, like Frank Zappa, were huge fans, with Zappa reportedly calling the riff from Supernaut one of the best he'd ever heard. Ozzy's future guitarist Zakk Wylde put it perfectly when he said of Tony Iommi, he created an art form. We're all employed because of this one guy. They didn't just play heavy music. They gave the genre its sound, its mood, its lyrical themes, and its entire identity. It all came from a place of authenticity, from their working-class anger, a tragic factory accident, and a brilliantly simple idea to sound different from everyone else. They wrote the grammar that every metal band after them, whether they realize it or not, is still speaking today. And that is why, over 50 years later, they remain the undisputed, most important metal band of all time. If you can hear the echoes of Sabbath in your favorite bands, destroy that like button and make sure you subscribe right now. I want you to settle the great debate in the comments below. What is the single greatest Black Sabbath riff of all time? Is it the unforgettable stomping march of Iron Man?